They laughed while doing it, smiled, slept peacefully, thinking silence would bury the truth. But secrets rot, and tonight the walls started talking. Someone finally opened their mouth, and now every heartbeat sounds like a siren. Because when the truth shows up uninvited, it doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. What was done in shadows is choking in the light. Guilt is pacing. Fear is wide awake. And the people who thought you'd forget, they're realizing something far worse. You remembered. And now, nobody gets to sleep. Truth doesn't arrive politely. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It leaks, it drips, it laughs while doing it. For a long time, the truth was treated like a joke, something you could bend, hide, lock in a drawer, and sit on like it would stay quiet forever. They told themselves stories to sleep better. They rewrote reality so often they started believing their own lies. And you watched, quietly. Not because you didn't know, but because you knew exactly how this works. Truth doesn't need noise. It needs time. Every move they made was built on the assumption that silence meant safety. That if no one spoke, nothing happened. That memory fades, evidence disappears, and guilt dissolves if you distract yourself long enough. They mistook patience for weakness. They mistook your restraint for ignorance. That's always the funniest part. People think the truth is fragile, when really it's just waiting for the right moment to stretch its legs. Then it happened. Not dramatically. Not with fireworks. Just one crack. One voice shaking just enough to give it away. One detail that didn't line up. And suddenly the room felt smaller. The air got heavier. Because once the truth shows its face, it starts pulling friends out of hiding. Lies don't stand well under bright lights. They sweat. They stutter. They contradict each other. You don't even have to push. You just watch them trip over their own versions. What makes truth terrifying isn't what it says. It's what it confirms. Every doubt you had, valid. Every gut feeling you ignored to keep the peace, right. Every night you questioned yourself, unnecessary. And that realization hits harder than anger. It rearranges the past. It changes who the villain really was. It exposes who benefited from your silence. And it forces everyone involved to confront something they were hoping would stay buried: accountability. Confession doesn't bring relief when it's forced by pressure. It brings panic, because now the narrative isn't theirs anymore. Control slips. Faces change. Voices soften. The same people who were bold in the dark suddenly want understanding in the light. They call it a mistake. They call it misunderstanding. Anything except what it really was. Because naming the truth means owning it, and ownership is expensive. Truth is cruel like that. It doesn't care about intentions. It doesn't negotiate with excuses. It stands there, smiling, while everyone scrambles to explain why they did what they did. And the more they talk, the clearer it becomes. Patterns emerge, motives surface. You start seeing how calculated it all was. Not random, not accidental, chosen, repeated, justified. And the funniest thing? You don't have to say a word. The truth does all the talking now. Every pause, every nervous glance, every sleepless night becomes part of the confession. They hear it in their heads on repeat. The moment they thought they got away with it. The moment they realized they didn't. The truth doesn't scream. It whispers, over and over, loud enough that it follows them into the dark, sits at the edge of the bed, and waits for their eyes to open again. Betrayal never looks like an enemy. That's the trick. It smiles like loyalty, sounds like concern, stands close enough to hear your heartbeat. It studies you, learns your patterns, learns what you fear, what you protect, what you'd never expect. Betrayal is patient. It doesn't rush. It waits until you're comfortable enough to lower your guard and call it trust. They didn't stab you in the front. That would have been honest. They stood beside you, nodded at your plans, agreed with your words, and kept their knife warm behind their back. Every laugh was rehearsed. Every compliment had a calculation. Every "I've got you" came with an expiration date, and the scariest part is how normal it felt. No warning alarms, no dramatic music, just routine, just familiarity, just someone close enough to hurt you deeply without trying. Betrayal feeds on access. They knew when to listen and when to stay quiet. They knew which parts of you were raw and which parts were armored. They watched you give the benefit of the doubt over and over again, mistaking kindness for blindness. They relied on your decency, on your belief that people don't cross certain lines. That assumption made everything easier for them. You weren't just trusting. You were predictable, and while you were building, they were borrowing pieces. While you were defending them, they were collecting excuses. They framed it as necessity, as survival, as something you'd understand if you knew the whole story. That's how betrayal justifies itself. It never calls itself what it is. It wears words like pressure, fear, mistake, anything to avoid admitting it was a choice. A series of choices, made when no one was watching, or so they thought. The moment it surfaced, everything rearranged itself. Memories hit differently. Conversations replayed with new subtitles. That pause you ignored. That reaction you brushed off. That odd distance that appeared for no reason. Suddenly it all made sense. Not because you became smarter overnight, but because the mask slipped. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Betrayal doesn't just hurt. It educates. What they never understood is that betrayal creates a witness, someone who now sees patterns, motives, timing, someone who recognizes manipulation before it finishes its sentence. They assumed the damage would silence you. Instead, it sharpened you. They thought exposure would embarrass you. It clarified you. Because when betrayal is dragged into the light, it stops being personal and starts being obvious. They're uncomfortable now. Not because you're angry, but because you're aware. Awareness is dangerous. You don't need revenge when truth is enough to make people nervous. They feel it in your calm, in your restraint, in the way you don't explain yourself anymore. They know you know, and that knowledge follows them everywhere. In conversations that go quiet when you enter. in smiles that don't reach the eyes, in nights where the mind refuses to shut up because betrayal has a sound. And once you hear it, it echoes forever. Guilt doesn't scream at first. It whispers, soft enough to ignore, light enough to joke about. They told themselves it wasn't that bad, that it had reasons, that anyone in their position would have done the same. Guilt loves those conversations. It thrives on self-justification. It sits quietly while people explain themselves into comfort, letting them believe they're still in control. But guilt is greedy. It never stays small. The longer it's denied, the heavier it gets. It shows up in pauses that last too long, in laughter that comes a second late, in eyes that can't hold contact without flinching. They feel it when the room goes silent for no reason. They feel it when your name comes up unexpectedly. They feel it when they're alone with nothing but their thoughts and no one left to convince. At first, they try to outrun it. Distractions, noise, busy schedules, anything to avoid that quiet moment where the mind starts replaying scenes frame by frame. What they said, what they did, what they thought they got away with. Guilt has a sense of humor like that. It doesn't accuse. It reminds. Over and over, same memory, same detail, same moment where a different choice could have been made. Sleep becomes complicated. The body rests, but the brain stays wide awake, pulling files they thought were deleted. They turn over, check the clock, scroll aimlessly, stare at the ceiling. Guilt doesn't let the lights turn off. It asks questions at 3 a.m., questions with no good answers. Was it worth it? Did anyone notice? What if it comes out? What if it already has? They start projecting. That's when guilt gets creative. Accusing others, deflecting blame, getting defensive over nothing. Anger becomes a shield. Sarcasm becomes a weapon. Because if they stay loud enough, maybe the truth won't be heard. But guilt doesn't need an audience. It performs privately. It knows exactly where to sit to be felt the most. The funny part is how guilt pretends to be moral. It shows up dressed as concern, as anxiety, as stress. They tell themselves they're just tired, just overwhelmed, just misunderstood. But guilt knows the difference. It knows when discomfort isn't circumstantial but earned, and it never lets that detail slide. As awareness grows, guilt tightens its grip. Now every reaction feels suspicious. Every coincidence feels personal. They start reading meaning into neutral expressions. A laugh sounds like judgment. A silence sounds like exposure. Even kindness feels dangerous, because forgiveness would require admission, and admission would make everything real. Guilt isolates. Not because others push them away, but because proximity feels risky. Too close and someone might see it. Too close and something might slip. So they pull back. They create distance. They convince themselves it's for peace, when really it's fear. Fear of being seen clearly. Fear of being named accurately. And the cruelest part is that guilt doesn't care whether you're punished or forgiven. It only cares that you remember, that you understand, that you sit with the weight of knowing exactly who you were in that moment and why you chose it. Guilt doesn't want justice. It wants acknowledgement. And until it gets it, it stays awake, tapping on the inside of the mind, smiling in the dark, making sure the past never stays quiet. Fear doesn't travel alone. It spreads, quietly, invisibly. One look, one rumor, one cracked voice is all it takes. It moves faster than truth because it doesn't need facts, only possibilities. The moment the first confession slipped out, fear started packing its bags and visiting everyone connected. Not knocking, not asking permission, just showing up and rearranging the furniture in their heads. At first, they thought it was contained. One person, one mistake, one loose mouth. That's how fear tricks you, by pretending it has borders. But fear loves networks. It jumps through conversations, through glances, through the sudden change in tone when certain names are mentioned. It lives in the questions people stop asking out loud. It grows in the silence between sentences. They start checking reactions more than words. Who's watching? Who's listening? Who knows more than they're saying? Fear turns everyone into a suspect and a witness at the same time. Trust collapses under its own weight. Allies feel temporary. Conversations feel staged. Every interaction becomes a performance designed to hide a pulse that's beating too fast. Fear sharpens hearing. Suddenly, every phone vibration matters. Every notification feels heavier than it should. They reread old messages, scanning for threats that weren't there before. They overthink jokes. They misinterpret kindness. Fear rewrites reality so everything feels like a warning. It convinces them exposure is closer than it actually is, and that anticipation is torture. Sleep becomes optional. Appetite becomes erratic. Focus becomes unreliable. Fear doesn't just live in the mind, it settles into the body. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, a constant sense of being late for something unnamed. They try to act normal, but fear leaks through micro-expressions, through forced laughter, through sudden irritability. People notice. That's the irony. The effort to hide fear often makes it visible. Fear also isolates groups. People stop communicating openly. They keep information fragmented, thinking that less shared means less risk. But fragmentation breeds paranoia. No one knows who knows what anymore. Stories don't line up. Timelines get messy, and fear thrives in confusion. It doesn't need consistency. It feeds on doubt. The ones who thought they were safe feel it too. Proximity becomes a liability. Being associated starts to feel dangerous. Fear makes people question past loyalty. Did standing by you implicate them? Did silence make them complicit? It forces self-preservation to the surface. And self-preservation isn't pretty. It whispers suggestions about distancing, denying, rewriting history before someone else does it for them. Fear has a sound. It's the sudden quiet when someone enters a room. It's the pause before answering simple questions. It's the way eyes flicker when truth gets close. It's contagious because it signals threat, and threat doesn't require proof. Once fear is activated, logic becomes optional. And while they're busy managing fear, you don't have to do anything. Fear handles the work. It turns them inward. It fractures their unity. It exhausts them. They start making mistakes because fear hates patience. It rushes decisions. It pushes people to talk when silence would have been safer, to act when waiting would have been smarter. Fear spreads until it reaches the ones who thought they were untouchable, the ones who believed distance protected them. Fear doesn't care about hierarchy. It doesn't respect confidence. It only recognizes vulnerability. And once it finds it, it settles in, uninvited, reminding everyone that secrets don't need enemies when fear is already inside, pacing, rehearsing explanations, preparing for a future that feels closer with every breath. Silence was supposed to protect them. That was the deal. Keep mouths shut, keep faces calm, keep the story thin enough to pass through any question without resistance. Silence felt powerful when it was shared, like a private language only a few understood. They treated it like armor. Like if no one spoke, nothing could be proven. Nothing could move, nothing could touch them. But silence has a breaking point. It stretches. It tightens. It starts making noise on its own. The longer it's forced, the heavier it becomes, until even breathing feels loud. Silence doesn't erase tension, it stores it. Every unspoken word stacks on top of the last one, building pressure behind smiles and casual conversations. They felt it in rooms where laughter sounded wrong, where pauses lasted a second too long, where everyone was waiting for someone else to blink first. Silence demands cooperation, and cooperation is fragile. All it takes is one person getting tired, one person feeling cornered, one person realizing they're carrying more weight than everyone else. Silence isn't loyal. It doesn't reward sacrifice. It lets the most nervous voice decide when everything collapses. That's why it always cracks unevenly. Once silence fractures, it can't be repaired. People start talking without saying much. Half confessions, careful wording, strategic honesty. Silence doesn't disappear. It mutates. It turns into avoidance, into deflection, into conversations that circle the truth without touching it. And everyone notices. Silence becomes suspicious. Absence becomes evidence. They try to control it, setting rules about what can be said and to whom, reminding each other to be careful. Silence turns into surveillance. People watch each other more closely than they watch outsiders. Who's nervous? Who's too calm? Who suddenly wants distance? Silence that once felt safe now feels like a trap where everyone's waiting for someone else to make the first mistake. Silence also exposes power shifts. The ones who were loud before go quiet. The ones who hid behind confidence start measuring every word. Silence flips roles. It elevates the observers, the listeners, the ones who don't need to explain themselves. Because when silence breaks, it doesn't break evenly. It shatters around the weakest point. The irony is how loud silence becomes once it's noticed. People fill it with assumptions, with theories, with interpretations. Silence stops being neutral and starts being accused. Every refusal to speak sounds intentional. Every no comment feels like confirmation. Silence loses its ambiguity and becomes a statement all on its own. They feel exposed without anyone actually pointing at them. That's the cruelty of it. No accusations, no confrontations, just a growing awareness that silence is no longer invisible. It's sitting in the room with them. Heavy, obvious, uncomfortable. It follows them into conversations that used to feel effortless. And the more they cling to silence, the more it works against them. Silence starts isolating instead of uniting. People pull away to avoid being associated with it. No one wants to be the last one holding the quiet when everything finally spills. Silence becomes lonely. Meanwhile, you don't rush it. You let silence do what it always does when it's overstretched. You let it reveal who's panicking, who's calculating, who's ready to talk. Silence doesn't need pressure from the outside. It collapses under its own weight, turning every unspoken truth into a presence that fills the space louder than words ever could. Consequences don't arrive with sirens. They don't announce themselves like heroes or villains. They show up quietly, wearing routine, pretending to be coincidence. At first, nothing looks different. Same places, same people, same habits. That's how consequences lure you into thinking you escaped. They let you breathe just long enough to relax before tightening the grip. The first consequence is restlessness, not panic, not regret, just an inability to settle. The body feels alert for no reason. The mind keeps checking exits. Every plan feels temporary. Every win feels unstable. They laugh, but it doesn't land. They smile, but it doesn't stay. Consequences begin by removing comfort, not control. Then routines start collapsing. Things that once flowed easily now require effort. Timing goes wrong. Words come out wrong. Opportunities misalign. Consequences don't destroy everything at once. They misfire the small things. Enough to irritate. Enough to distract. Enough to keep the mind busy fixing problems instead of noticing the pattern forming underneath. Relationships change next. Not dramatically. Subtly. Tone shifts. Responses shorten. Invitations slow down. Trust thins out without explanation. People sense weight before they understand it. Consequences have gravity. They pull distance into places that used to feel close. Conversations become careful. Laughter becomes measured. Everyone starts choosing words like they're walking through glass. Sleep is the real battlefield. Nights stretch. Dreams get specific. The mind replays moments it once skipped over. Consequences love repetition. Same scene. Same detail. Same question looping without resolution. They don't need to scare you. They just need to keep you awake long enough to remember everything you tried to forget. Then comes exposure without accusation. No one points. No one confronts. But eyes linger a little longer. Silence arrives a little faster. Consequences turn awareness into pressure. They let you feel seen without being spoken to. That's when the imagination does the damage. What do they know? How much do they know? Who told them? Consequences don't answer questions. They multiply them. Control starts slipping in strange ways. Overreactions. Impulsive decisions. Defensive jokes. You can tell when consequences are working because behavior becomes inconsistent. People either talk too much or disappear entirely. They justify things that weren't questioned. They explain themselves to people who didn't ask. Consequences turn confidence into noise. Time becomes distorted. The past feels closer than it should. The future feels vague. Plans don't feel solid. Everything is provisional. Consequences remove certainty. They don't punish immediately. They destabilize slowly, making every step feel like it could trigger something unseen. And the hardest part is that consequences don't need your participation. You can deny them, minimize them, mock them. They continue anyway. They don't argue. They don't negotiate. They adjust the environment until discomfort becomes normal and normal becomes unbearable. Eventually, consequences start asking for payment, not publicly, privately, in missed chances, in broken focus, in trust that never fully returns, in the constant awareness that something shifted and can't be shifted back. Consequences aren't about revenge. They're about balance, about weight redistributing itself, whether you agree with it or not. And once they've settled in, they don't rush to leave. They stay, observing, waiting, letting every choice echo a little louder than it used to, letting every quiet moment remind you that actions don't end when they're hidden. They end when they're answered.